I think there's tons of really, really cool opportunities for things like under collateralized payroll lending or using payroll as collateral. And that serves to be a form of credit as well, right? So I think those are a few of the things that I think we have in terms of this idea of global credit scores. I'm very optimistic on doing this properly and doing this right. And I think eventually we will have those systems. I'd like to think that we can actually build towards a future that really does revolve around global credit in a fair and transparent way.
Hi everyone, and welcome yet to another exciting episode of NEWFORUM. And we're always happy to bring you awesome creators, founders, visionaries, and developers on our podcast. And NEWFORUM is powered by NewCoin Foundation, and it's our aim to spark informative and educative human-centered conversations on the topics of crypto, NFTs, DAOs, DeFi, and the metaverse. And on today's episode, I'm super excited to have with me Kaito Cunningham, the co-founder of Utopia Labs, a platform that offers collaborative payroll and payments for your DAO, which is backed by communities such as Friends with Benefits, Sushiswap, and PleasrDao. And I'm super excited to talk with him about Utopia Labs, the state of DAO tooling, and what it's like to build a business in the world of crypto today. Hi, Kaito. I'm super happy to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Really excited to get into a few of the questions there.
Amazing. So how did you got so hyped about DAOs, and what was your first founder story? So how did you got into crypto, and what got you so hyped about DAOs specifically?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I got into crypto relatively recently. I wasn't like this person who was in the space for like a decade. I don't even know if the space was alive for a decade to that extent, right? So for me, I got into it about 2 years ago. Was really, really interested in this idea. For a quick kind of bit of context, I was a college student from Canada. Thought it'd be really cool to have this idea of global credit scores if I ever went to America. My mom went to Japan. So I think there was just this international nature of finance that I was just kind of interested in. Analyzed a lot of the current systems today. It was kind of interesting. This idea of credit scores were only applicable to specific nations. So I got into this idea of crypto specifically when I thought of this idea of a global credit score. It didn't, that's kind of the way I got into it. Started digging into this space even more. I started writing and researching and even making small YouTube videos at a certain point in time. And as I kind of dug into the space, I got interested in this idea of how crypto is doing a ton of cool stuff in finance, and also this idea of how crypto is doing a ton of cool stuff in this idea of governance and how politics and how things could eventually change with how people coordinate online. So eventually took me to DAOs. And funny enough, I actually met my co-founders all over Discord and Twitter. So I wouldn't consider us a DAO, so to say, but we met all online. We started kind of building stuff together. And then, for us, we came in from an extremely problem-oriented perspective. So just looked at a few of the larger DAOs out there that were operating, dug into how they currently run their operations and in terms of how they do things like payments and payroll and all those things that you wouldn't think are too relatable for, like a Web3 company, so to say, or too much of a big pain point. Found a lot of conviction in terms of what we're building specifically with the back office there, and just been kind of doubling down and building on that vision ever since. So that's a really quick kind of TLDR life story since I discovered crypto to where we're at now.
Amazing. And yeah, I also read that you raised 23 million for Utopia Labs. So congrats to that. And I want to know, what is the kind of like purpose behind it? I mean, you talked a bit about DAOs now. So what is a DAO and what is the purpose behind what you guys are building?
Yeah, I think for us, like the way we're thinking about this is DAOs today are not what's going to be with how DAOs look like in 5-10 years. We have a few opinions of how they're probably going to look like. But we don't have a 110% conviction that this is what DAOs are going to be in the next 5-10 years of how they coordinate, et cetera. So for us, the way we're coming into this is being extremely tactical in the short term of what we're building, and what we're building right now are relatively tangible things. There are things that when we ship them, I like to think DAOs find value in them or use them, right? But there's also this longer horizon in terms of the way we're thinking about product, of how we can actually scale DAOs to what they are today. A lot of the larger DAOs, I don't have an exact number, but they're not relatively large as an employment vehicle versus something like a Fortune 500. So the way we think about this is, how do we actually get DAOs to a scale where they could actually serve as a recognized kind of employment vehicle for a lot of people? So that's kind of our long-term way of thinking about our product, which is how do we build software to allow these weird crypto native internet organizations that talk on Discord to actually kind of reach the impact and scale that they all eventually want to. And one way that we do that is by basically removing, 80% of the administration costs that come with managing a DAO. It's kind of weird that, there are those things that are still there, but they're still there. How do you pay people right? How do you pay people accurately? What is the right compensation mechanism? How do you actually have transparent contextual bookkeeping for other people to see? Like all those questions are still available, right? And there's still things that DAOs really want answers to. And in fact, those are a few of the workflows that are completely different with how DAOs operate today. And that's kind of where we step in. So that's the way I think about our product and where DAOs are eventually going to be. And they're eventually the reason why we raised a certain amount of capital in the first place, which is the fact that we have conviction in this. We have a conviction in this idea of just crypto native internet organizations and building infrastructure to support those things.
Yeah, I think we had so many Twitter lives and discussions about DAOs recently, the concept pros, and we see a lot of issues right now with the governance, the voting structure. And I think somebody of our community member was like, there needs to be a structure to this, because otherwise there's no progress. You cannot track anything, because we live off this idea of like decentralized and there's no boss, but you need to have some kind of structures. And you also mentioned the scalability of a DAO. And for me, I'm wondering, how scalable is a DAO? Because I know recent DAOs that I wanted to join, there's a really high fee or there's certain kind of barriers. So maybe where do you see the DAO in the future? Like how scalable is this whole DAO concept?
Really good question. I think there's so many elements there, and I'll kind of try to like combine this all into like a few quick like takes. But I think one thing is like right now DAOs basically run on direct democracies, which basically mean that every single person votes on a specific thing. And the hard thing there is this idea of contextuality, right? Like on your end, you might know a certain thing. You might know more about a specific domain. Let's just say you're an engineer and I'm not. You're more qualified to an extent to make that engineering decision, right? So this idea of direct and representative democracies are interesting, and we're starting to see kind of developments there of basically people representing a group of people to make decisions faster, but also make decisions more efficiently. So that's something that I think we're going to see much more common. With the current kind of political system, so to say, with representative democracies, the hardest thing is this idea of an incentive alignment and interest alignment, right? So with typical systems, the person representing the majority of the people sometimes might have different incentives representing the majority of the people. I'd like to think with crypto systems, it's much harder to kind of game, and because most of it's on chain. So there's really interesting things there with how DAOs are eventually going to make decisions better. The second thing that I think about is it relates to this idea of kind of representative democracies and this idea of like sub DAOs and this idea of basically kind of like, having pods and working groups. And a lot of those things are really valuable for basically kind of centralizing decision making to an extent. But I think the most important thing that we've seen, specifically from our experience building, is this idea of accountability. That is probably the most important thing, because I think the DAOs that have great vibes are awesome too. But the ones that ship product, or the ones that actually have a tangible vision and value and purpose, are the ones that are eventually going to win. And I think the way we've been thinking about this is eventually there's going to be these working groups underneath a specific parent DAO that all have their own specific kind of incentive alignment, or even things that are considered to be their own KPIs that all relate to the larger DAO. So a good example is like, the marketing sub DAO or a working group for a specific DAO has different metrics that determine their success versus maybe like an engineering or product group, right? So I think each of these kind of working groups should have their own kind of metrics that they should achieve that all relate to like this vision and mission that an organization has. And that type of accountability and transparency is still really hard to kind of really put in place from a structural kind of angle right now. So those are a few of the things, which is like accountability, reporting, even just decision making are the things that we've seen to be relatively kind of broken today.
Yeah, and from your perspective, like when it comes to like leadership in DAOs, and like let's say we have these DAO managers, or I don't know what you want to call it, because we we're a decentralized autonomous organization, but what do you think do they have to bring to the table to manage this in a good and efficient way? I feel like there could be some issues, but I feel like the leadership that we need right now probably is something that we haven't seen before, especially in the DAO space. Yeah. I'm wondering, what do successful DAOs have, maybe in leadership and team, that other DAOs don't have?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with focus. Funny enough, a lot of the challenges that like typical companies go through are relatively related to an extent with DAOs, right? So focus, I think, is probably one of the most important things, where one specific idea is like there's a lot of initiatives associated with a specific DAO, right? And it's a beautiful thing. Like there's this idea of creativity that people are allowed to kind of pursue the projects that they would like. But I also think that there's some things in regards to scope and focus that are pretty important. So that's one thing that I've noticed, which is this idea that it's very hard if a DAO doesn't have it. Again, it starts from the top down of this idea of vision and mission and purpose. Although however nuanced it sounds, it seems to be like the most effective thing. So I think the way I think about this is focus is probably one of the most important things that I've seen for DAOs to actually be successful. And it also starts with kind of the vision and mission. Like one specific one is like Gitcoin, and the way they kind of think about things that they're building are all pretty relatively focused to the mission, right? So I think that component is very interesting and valuable. Another really common and easy one, maybe less of a management one, is this idea of treasury management. We've seen this idea of like native tokens being like the only kind of thing in the treasury. And we've seen some really good approaches to diversifying treasury, but I think that comes from more of a parent DAO angle. But I think that's also a really important thing that I'm happy to touch on later as well. But those are a few of the things that are off the top of my head.
I want to go right into what you just said about the tokens. So a lot of times these DAOs, they have their own tokens, or they maybe have multiple tokens that they run off their systems. And I'm just wondering how from like a technical point of view, how scalable is that? Like if we have let's say a friends with benefits token, that might work because we have a lot of community investing in the pool and everything. But if we split this up into, okay, let's say we have a Joy token, we have then a Harrison token, we have like all these different tokens. I'm wondering the tokenomics behind it, like in your opinion, because right now obviously we see with crypto there's a lot of volatility, and I'm wondering with social tokens and these like DAO governance tokens, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's definitely a question that I think we've been trying to think about. I don't think I'm the best person to answer this, but I've been trying to learn as much as I possibly can about this space as well. But I think at a high level, what we're noticing is that this idea of treasury management is a very important thing. It's mostly just this idea of hedging risk, right? At a certain point in time, it would have made sense for some DAOs to basically go through whatever it is, a treasury diversification round, some of their kind of natives into stables. We're starting to see kind of the effects of, if you don't do that, there's DAOs now that have 3 to 6 months runway, for example, right? And it's really interesting to think about because I wonder what the percentage likelihood of what we consider DAO success to be like. Like there's like a pretty typical and common saying that there's 99% of the startups out there fail. Whatever that number is, I'm really curious to see what we're going to see with DAOs, and I think it's still too early to actually consider what failure means even, right? Does failure mean completely shutting down? What does success look like? Like, I don't even think we had those criteria ironed out to an extent of categorizing what that means. But I think from that native and kind of liquid token angle, I think there's things that just turn out to be like really like native tokens are just simply like kind of like marketing costs, right? Liquidity mining, you're paying for cost, like it's CAC, it's customer acquisition costs, right? Whenever you actually do give out your native token. So I think that's the way we look at it, in the sense that like these risk management practices were not established, but they eventually are going to be established. And I think that's one thing DAOs have learned the hard way, sadly. I'd like to think that governance tokens do accrue value to an extent, but that's also something that I think a lot of people have different thoughts on. And I'm just trying to learn a bit more about that space as well.
It's funny because I feel like 3 months ago, 4 months ago, we've been talking about DAOs and just like as a concept. And now we actually see like things evolve. And I'm really curious to see where we go from 5 months from now. Like, is every creator going to have a coin? Like, where are the DAOs at? What's going to happen? So, and you mentioned in the beginning that you got into the space because you were interested in universal credits. I'm wondering, like, do you think there is a possibility of having a universal credit system, or having it more, because right now it's managed by each country, each state, they have different rules, we have different laws. And I'm wondering, DAOs, bringing in so many people from all over the world who work for different DAOs or work for different companies, from the legal side or from that side, like, do you think that is possible to have like a universal kind of DeFi system, universal DAO system?
I'd like to think so. I think this idea of credit on chain is a very interesting concept because, I think crypto is ultimately meant to stand to democratize barriers to access to things that should be, a public good, or what people kind of have the ability to kind of access, right? One of them are obviously financial products. And I think when you think of it like that, then credit is a great system to an extent because it increases capital efficiency, right? And basically, I'm able to earn leverage, et cetera, and basically earn more, borrow more, et cetera. And I think those are really powerful things. But then the real question to ask is like, currently, what are the things that are wrong with the current credit systems today? I think a lot of it has to do with not providing the access to a lot of underprivileged households. If you're international, I think there's really hard situations there as well. So I think when you think of all the things that are wrong with the current credit system today, I'd like to think that crypto as an infrastructure, as a technology, has the ability to make it more fair and accessible. But then the question comes up, right? So like, one really important and easy kind of thing to think about with this idea of credentialism on chain, you can think of this in so many different ways. One is this idea that like, hey, when I'm on a DeFi, system like Aave, and I start to kind of like show history that I'm able to pay back my loans on Aave, does that mean eventually I'm able to get a better kind of rate? And what does that mean? Because if I'm able to access Aave 5 years earlier, then let's just say my mother, does that mean I get a better credit score than my mom because I've been using the product more? Like, I think those are the questions worth asking about, right? And I think there's probably really smart people working on this. So if anybody has any links to specific solutions on how to make this kind of a fair system, I'd be super curious. But then you could even look at credit and identity from a global perspective, from even this idea of like the interactions that Utopia streamlined. So a really obvious one is what we do is we streamline the experience of a DAO paying their contributors. There's an entire market in Web 2 of people basically getting their payroll earlier, and obviously using their employment history as a way of getting better credit. So I think those things are things that we might be able to service, in the sense that we want to make this fair and transparent and accessible to all the people that are getting employed by DAOs, right? So I think there's tons of really, really cool opportunities for things like under collateralized payroll lending or using payroll as collateral. And that serves to be a form of credit as well, right? So I think those are a few of the things that I think we have in terms of this idea of global credit scores. I'm very optimistic on doing this properly and doing this right. And I think eventually we will have those systems. I don't have a time, but I'd like to think that we can actually build towards a future that really does revolve around global credit in a fair and transparent way. So that's the way I think about ideally the space, and it's just definitely very interesting to me.
Well, I love what you said, that you're also coming with the right intention, and you said in crypto sometimes it gets a bad rap of people now wanting to build quickly and then things break or whatever, but it's a long-term vision for, I think, really the Web3 founders who are going to be here for a long time. And I also love the idea that we have been freelancing, and there have been people like coming from where we come from, New Life, New Coin ecosystem. We care about creators, we care about people who create content, who create from the fashion scene, from the art scene, from the music scene. And it's known that freelancers from especially these spaces, there's no real guidance, or there's no transparency with like contracts and with like payments and all these things. And I think the things that you guys are working on for these DAOs are going to be super important, because we need the infrastructure like right now. Like, how are we going to navigate these DAOs and get all these people on the payroll and do all these things if there's no infrastructure and no transparency and structure? So I think I'm super excited to where you guys are going. And my last question for you today would be, where do you see yourself, or where do you see Utopia going, or maybe a future outlook on what you would like the space to become?
Yeah, I think when I think about the future of our company specifically, I like to think that we're going to be a key player to accelerating these ideas of DAOs and these crypto native internet organizations. I'd like to think that we're kind of the backbone that powers a lot of these organizations, from both this idea of financial and the people stack, right? I think the beautiful thing about DAO specifically is that the key differences, in my opinion, is that there's only really key two differences, which is DAOs are powerful because they have liquid labor and liquid capital, right? Basically what that means is that they're able to allocate these two things that are extremely dense and scarce resources extremely efficiently, or ideally extremely efficiently at a certain point in time. So the way I think about Utopia is our software is the thing that powers these two things that make DAOs extremely special. So when you think of it like that, I think there's so many tools that we can build, whether you come from a banking angle to a software angle to a smart contract angle to even a deeper infra angle. Like, there's just really different approaches that we're thinking about a lot. So I think that's the way I think about our product, which is being able to be at this intersection and this overlap between the people and finance stack, which is eventually just liquid labor and liquid capital. I think maybe the second part of your question is, where do I want to see crypto? I think we're seeing a lot of things. I think, Again, I think like, this idea of global credit, global identity are the really interesting things there. I'm really interested in this idea of global identity and what that means for people who are getting employed by DAOs. I think that's a really interesting thing. We're kind of keeping an eye on a lot of things here, and just thinking about a lot of these things and really thinking about how we can actually build the best product eventually for our customers in the first place. So I know I kind of went on a long-winded answer, but I think that's the way I think about Utopia in the future. We have a lot left in terms of what we want to build, and we're also hiring as well. So that's kind of the current roundup of where we're at.
We are excited to see where you guys are going and what's going to happen in the future. And Kaito, quickly, where can our community find you on your social platforms?
Yeah. I think my Twitter profile is 0xKaito, I believe. So feel free to find me on Twitter. That's probably the platform that I'm on most. So feel free to DM me there.
Amazing. If you're interested in Utopia Labs or what they are building right now, make sure to follow them. And yeah, thank you everyone for being part of today's forum. And if you guys also want to get more involved within our community, make sure to follow us on our social platforms. We are NEWFORUM_NCO and also NewCoin. And yeah, I can't wait for the next episode. And this was so much fun. I learned so much. So thank you so much to Kaito. And yeah, see you guys in the next episode.